we begin with the president's trade war escalating tonight. This evening, the retaliation against the United States, Canada, and the European Union responding quickly, just hours after President Trump's 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States.
Everything changed overnight. Canada, once the U.S.'s most reliable ally, dealt a blow that the U.S. economy could no longer shrug off. A 25% tariff on cars from the U.S. became a reality. Prime Minister Mark Carney announced it without hesitation, right from the steps of Parliament, surrounded by applauding ministers. From now on, North America will no longer be the same.
That's from the European Automobile Manufacturers Association. People just choosing with their wallets to not buy Teslas because of that Musk-Trump association. And actually here in London, an activist group called Everyone Hates Elon actually have been hacking bus stop signs with posters. I actually passed one yesterday. At first I wasn't quite sure what was happening, but it said the words 0 to 1939 in 3 seconds. Illusion here, 0 to 60 in like 3 seconds or something. But this poster was alluding to the start of World War II, and the image was of Musk giving that hand salute that we saw at Trump's inauguration that many have attacked as a Nazi gesture. Musk, though, has neither admitted or denied what he was doing. But we're seeing the knock-on effect of that anti-Musk anger across Europe and in terms of sales.
What seemed impossible just yesterday is now disrupting the multi-billion-dollar flow of goods between the two countries. Canadian auto plants in Ontario, which produced parts for Detroit, are under siege. Parts that used to cross the border without customs barriers are now subject to duties that make them nearly twice as expensive. In response to Washington's actions, Ottawa has chosen open confrontation, jeopardizing decades of integration, and with them the fate of giants like Tesla, Ford, and GMC.
Over the last couple of months. But the other thing that this could potentially be is an attempt at readjustment or correction by the Trump administration, in that one of Trump's closest kind of allies and supporters, and someone who's clearly very influential in the administration, is coming out to kind of push back against the recently implemented policies. So I'm thinking, or maybe hopeful is the right word, that this might be a signal that the administration is considering walking back some of those policies.
But why now? Why now? Behind the scenes, things are much darker than they appear. According to fictitious insider reports, the first crisis meetings at the headquarters of American auto giants began even before Carney's official announcement. Even then, analysts estimated losses for Tesla in Canada could exceed $500 million in just 1 year. Ford and GMC expect a 15% drop in sales, which in terms of real money will result in a loss of billions.
Outperforming as well in some cases, doing better than Tesla. And you just have to think, how much more is this a sustained issue for Tesla going forward, given the fact that you have Elon Musk, who's been very forthright in his opinions, particularly weighing in on politics, particularly in Europe. We've just had the European elections, which Musk has been very focused on. But across the piece, when you look at the performance for Tesla in Europe, it's not just in small countries. There are a lot of countries where Tesla has been performing badly, including in Germany, in the UK, where it has been lagging, and Spain as well.
The financial losses, however, are only the tip of the iceberg. There's something bigger behind it: collapsed trust. America, which for decades has viewed Canada as a junior partner, now faces a reality where its northern neighbor is willing to defend its interests at any cost. More than 70% of Canadians, according to flash polls, support Carney's tough course, even if it hits their wallets. This isn't a temporary blip. It's a conscious reversal. It's not just in Washington that the signal Ottawa has sent has been heard. Already, according to insider leaks, European and Asian auto companies are looking at Canada as a new base for expansion in North America. Building plants, relocating production facilities, reorienting trade flows, all of this will become a new reality in the coming years if things don't change.
Teslas are being torched across the country. Dealerships shot up and set on fire. Spray paint to vandalize and make a statement. People in Southern California are getting notes on their Teslas, calling them complicit Nazis for owning electric cars.
And while Washington gets bogged down in political wrangling and Trump relies on a policy of ultimatums, Canada is single-handedly rewriting the rules of the game. How far will this war go? Who has more to lose, American corporations or Canadian consumers? And are Tesla and Ford really on the verge of the biggest collapse in their history? Today, we'll look behind the high-profile headlines and show how one decision can change the economic map of an entire continent. This isn't just a trade dispute. It's a battle for the future.
After Trump imposed those sweeping 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel imports, the European Union retaliating with tariffs on up to $28 billion of U.S. goods. Trump making it clear this isn't over, vowing to respond in kind with sweeping retaliatory tariffs early next month.
They're doing what they should be doing, perhaps, for the European Union, but it does create ill will. And as you know, we're going to be doing reciprocal tariffs. So whatever they charge us, we're charging them.
Canada also striking back with new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods, mostly steel and aluminum, but also computers and sporting goods.
North America has woken up to a different world. What for years seemed like an unshakable alliance has split in a matter of hours. When Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney went to the press and solemnly announced a 25% tariff on all cars from the United States, no one doubted a full-scale trade war had begun, the reverberations of which would be felt for years. Ottawa's decision was not just a response to the new measures of the White House. It was an act of economic independence, caused by the growing pressure, and according to the Canadian side, betrayal of the principles of partnership. Throughout the North American trade agreements, whether NAFTA or CUSMA, Canada and the US have built a unique system of end-to-end auto manufacturing. Parts assembled in Ontario crossed the border duty-free, traveled to Detroit, were turned into cars, and traveled across the continent. This integration was so deep that many factories didn't recognize the concept of national product at all, and suddenly it all came crushing down.
Hey Diane, this investigation really just beginning, and one of the key elements will of course be the surveillance video, and investigators potentially have a lot of it to work with as they try to figure out what caused this fire. We know that surveillance footage has been turned over, including video from each of the cars, which could prove vital to understanding what happened here, because each vehicle has its own camera system that works even when the car is off, and 16 cars burned in this fire. And right now, investigators don't know what caused it.
Trump, back in early 2025, initiated new tariffs on imported cars, explaining that it was to protect the domestic market. But the effect was the exact opposite. Instead of the expected growth of production in the US, Canada perceived these measures as a declaration of war. Already on April 2nd, Carney convened an emergency meeting of the government, at which it was decided, no concessions. The retaliation must be swift, symmetrical, and painful. Fictitious leaks from the Commerce Department reported that Carney had purposely accelerated the agreement procedure to show Washington Canada would no longer behave like a junior partner. "Our factories will not pay for the political ambitions of others," was the slogan that became popular in the Canadian media in those days.
Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., slapping new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods that are sold in Canada. And the 27 countries of the European Union imposing retaliatory tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of U.S. goods sold in Europe, including Harley-Davidson motorcycles and Kentucky bourbon. President Trump with the Irish Prime Minister visiting the White House today. The president suggesting his tariffs won't stop here, saying, "Of course, I'm going to respond." And tonight, right here, the new poll showing 56% of Americans disapprove of President Trump's handling of the economy. The number's even worse now on the president's tariffs.
The moment Canada struck back came as a real shock to American business. Tesla, Ford, GMC, all those companies that for decades had perceived Canada as a reliable sales market were suddenly trapped. More than 93% of Canadian auto exports went to the US, and $80 billion in annual auto industry trade was now jeopardized. But it was American companies that felt the blow first. The reason was simple. Many models produced in the US were sold in Canada with minimal markups. Now, a 25% tariff was added to the price, making American cars uncompetitive with Asian and European brands. In reality, economists were predicting a 20% drop in US car sales in Canada, but fictional analyst reports were already discussing scenarios of a 30 to 35% market collapse by the end of the year.
Well, you will hear people over in Europe say the new Model Y, the Juniper, could be a difference maker, but that's been in that market now for more than a month. And you would think that you'd see a greater snapback if it's going to be a difference maker. Look, we could be wrong. It could be a difference maker once you get the sales for April, May, and June. But when you have a country like Norway, I think the sales were down something like 11% there. I mean, that's a very savvy EV consumer in Norway. And that's long been a strength for Tesla. Very small market, not huge volume, but I think almost all of the vehicles they sell there are electric. And they embraced Tesla long before others. And, you know, the reports there are not encouraging.
The gap has struck at the heart of production logistics. Ontario auto plants, formerly closely tied to U.S. operations, now found themselves in a double bind, component shipments slowed by bureaucratic delays, and finished cars suddenly became twice as expensive. According to internal reports fictionalized to heighten tensions, production at Oakville's largest plant fell 17% in the first week after the tariffs were announced, and more than 1,000 employees were put on forced vacations. U.S. auto giants, accustomed to duty-free trade, were not prepared for such a scenario. And while some executives tried to persuade the Trump administration to reconsider the tariff policy, fictitious reports from the White House made it clear there would be no retreat. What's more, the president's advisors allegedly proposed even tougher conditions for Canadian steel and aluminum producers in response, which only exacerbated the crisis. Tesla found itself at the epicenter of this storm. In 2024 alone, the company sold more than 22,000 cars in Canada, earning more than $1.5 billion. At the same time, Tesla was actively using Canadian subsidies for the development of electric vehicles. But the 25% tariff wiped out all calculations. In addition, the Canadian government fictitiously but plausibly cancelled incentives U.S. manufacturers, leaving Tesla without its previous support. Analysts, based on real data, estimated the company's possible losses in Canada at up to $500 million in the first year alone after the new tariffs were implemented.
KTLA Samantha Cortese joins us live with more on the wave of vandalism in protest of Elon Musk and his role in Washington. Sam?
Hi, Sharon, Micah. The ATF and FBI are collaborating with federal, state, and local law enforcement to investigate acts of domestic terrorism surrounding Teslas.
Ford and GMC found themselves in a similar position. Despite having assembly facilities in Canada, the bulk of their most popular models, pickup trucks and SUVs, were still shipped from the United States. The new terms meant a price increase of $3,000 to $5,000 per vehicle. For consumers, this was a signal to look for alternatives. Japanese, Korean, and German brands, not burdened by American tariffs, immediately launched aggressive marketing campaigns, offering discounts and new credit terms. The fictitious but logical forecasts of research agencies noted, if the situation does not change, the market share of Ford and GM Canada could fall by 10 to 15% by the end of 2025. And all this was unfolding against the backdrop of a general destabilization of the North American economy. With each passing day, it was becoming clearer. The breakdown of the former integration of the auto industry between Canada and the US would not be a temporary phenomenon. In fictitious but close to reality, closed-door meetings in Toronto discussed plans to shift exports to Europe and Asia. Some Japanese and German brands were already showing interest in building new plants in Canada to use it as a springboard to circumvent US trade barriers.
I mean, the things that he's doing is not trying to make America better. He's ruining our infrastructure, every department in our government. He's ruining, and he's right now destroying our economy. He's taken away all of our allies. We're a pariah in the world.
This was a hard lesson for America. The protectionist policy did not bring manufacturing back home, but rather the collapse of one of the most stable trade alliances in the world. At stake was not just billions of dollars and thousands of jobs. At stake was the future of the North American economy, its ability to remain competitive in a globalized world. And the first blow in this new reality had been struck. And it hurt. The blow to Tesla was far more devastating than anyone expected in the days after the tariffs were announced. For a company used to considering Canada as one of its strategic territories outside the US, the new reality was a cold shower. Not only did Tesla lose impressive sales volumes, but it also lost crucial subsidies that had helped it keep its prices competitive for years. Gov. Mark Carney acted decisively. All federal programs supporting foreign electric car makers were scrapped as early as April 5th, just days after the tariffs went into effect. According to real data, Tesla received about $43 million in subsidies from Canadian authorities in 2024, and now that money is gone.
Well, this feels more like a Tesla-only story when you look at just this fall in EV sales for them that they're suffering across Europe, down 45% in January. The wider EV market in Europe up 37%, so rivals are catching up and performing.
This has created a double blow to Elon Musk's business. On the one hand, the 25% tariff dramatically increased the cost of each model in the Canadian market. On the other, the incentives that previously helped convince a buyer to opt for a Tesla have disappeared. Fictitious reports, allegedly prepared by the company's internal analysts, predicted that sales in Canada could plummet by 60% over the next 12 months, which automatically meant a loss of more than $500 million in revenue. And in the long term, that threatened to reduce Tesla's overall market capitalization by $2 billion to $3 billion, a figure Musk couldn't ignore. Elon Musk, according to fictional leaks from his inner circle, was furious. In private meetings, emergency measures were discussed, from attempts to lobby for the tariffs to be lifted through Washington to options for an assembly plant in Canada itself. However, all proposals faced a harsh reality. Building a new plant would require at least 3 years and an investment of more than $2 billion. And there was no time to maneuver. Moreover, there were rumors that even if a new plant was built, Tesla could face a cold reception from Canadian authorities if the Trump administration continued its aggressive economic policies.
Running around on stage with a Tesla stock price, where the stock price had gone in half. And he was overjoyed. What an evil thing to do. What a creep. What a jerk. Like, who derives joy?
Compounding the problem was the fact that the perception of the Tesla brand in Canada was rapidly deteriorating. In a wave of public outrage against US tariff aggression, Tesla began to be perceived as a symbol of Trump economics, especially among younger buyers previously loyal to the brand. In fictionalized social surveys conducted by marketing agencies in Toronto and Vancouver, more than 40% of potential buyers said they were now more likely to choose Asian or European brands. While Tesla struggled to find any solution, Ford and GMC found themselves in an equally dire situation. Despite their deep integration with the Canadian market, their dependence on American manufacturing proved fatal. Most of their most profitable models, such as the Ford 150 pickup truck or the GMC Yukon SUV, were produced in American factories and were now automatically subject to the new tariff.
So there are a couple of things that might be going on here. So on the one hand, it could be that just at a very basic level, Musk has quickly observed a 40% decline in sales in Tesla in Europe.
Thus, internal and external blows to the American system were coming simultaneously, reinforcing each other. While allies turned away and the economy cracked under the weight of its own mistakes, a veritable ideological conflagration was raging inside the country. America had to choose between continuing to believe in an illusion or finally recognizing reality and fighting for its own salvation. As the political debate grew more and more fierce, the real sector of the American economy was being hit on a catastrophic scale. Among the first to fail were the giants of American engineering, John Deere and Ford. When it became clear that tariff wars deprived them of key markets and make production in the US economically unprofitable, they began to make decisions that seemed unthinkable just a few years ago. Cautiously at first, then more and more openly they began to move production overseas, where costs were lower and risks were lower. John Deere, one of the symbols of American agriculture, announced in May 2025 that it would close 3 plants in Iowa and move some production capacity to Mexico. This news struck at the heart of the American Midwest. Thousands of workers whose families had built their lives around Deere plants for decades received layoff notices. In reality, the layoffs affected about 6,000 employees, and fictional but plausible reports from independent analysts noted that in related industries, each plant layoff spawned 2 more layoffs in small businesses ranging from auto repair stores to hardware stores. Ford followed Deere in announcing it would move electric vehicle production to Mexico and Vietnam, where labor and logistics costs are half those in the United States. At the same time, the company officially stated that it was forced to adapt to new economic realities. Fictitious internal memos allegedly leaked to the press were blunt. Trump's policies made manufacturing inside the US commercially unviable in the next 5 years. This was the beginning of a new wave of deindustrialization, far more devastating than the 2008 crisis. Large factories built back in the mid-20th century began to turn into ghosts, huge empty hulks where silence reigned instead of humming machines. Small businesses that served the giants of the automobile industry were also doomed. The disappearance of orders meant imminent bankruptcy. Car repair shops, logistics firms, part suppliers, all of them began to close their doors one by one. Workers who had recently believed in the revival of American industry now stood in long lines at job centers. Fictionalized local media reports told of former mechanics and engineers retraining as delivery men or laborers just to make ends meet. Fear of the future was becoming the new normal. An Economic Stability Institute study, fictional but logical, reported 58% of families in industrial states felt the threat of real poverty for the first time in 30 years. And at that moment, when it seemed things couldn't get any worse, the next wave of crisis hit in the airline industry. Boeing, once an unshakable pillar of American technological superiority, was sucked into a deadly vortex. Faced with the threat of 200% tariffs on products manufactured outside the US, the company made a forced decision to move some assembly lines to Mexico and Brazil. This caused quite a shock in Seattle, where Boeing plants have been the heart of the economy for decades.